Howdy guys, I'm Aiden and welcome back to the Archive channel. Today I'm going to teach you how to make this thumbnail inside of Davinci Resolve. Disclaimer, I'm not really going to touch on the text or the background, mostly because that information is everywhere on YouTube. The short answer is just to use Fusion. But what I don't see covered nearly enough is how to retouch people in thumbnails. I know this looks like I just shot this straight out of camera, but if I get rid of all these layers here, yeah, this is what I actually shot. Notice how it looks way worse? Turns out there's a lot of work you have to do, like messing with levels, curves, selective color adjustment, painting on layers, messing with the background. And I don't know about you, but I've never really understood this process. If you do, that's fine. Continue to use Affinity and Photoshop. But I wonder, could I replicate this process inside of Davinci Resolve? And turns out the answer is yes. So here I am in a normal project, and we're going to be working with two clips today. One is Log, and one is Rec 709. This is from a friend of mine, JayTheZoomster. I'll leave this video linked down in the description below. For those who don't know the difference, Log is essentially a shooting mode inside the camera that makes your footage look gray, but trust me, it's not a bad thing. It actually gives you more dynamic range. The only difference is you have to fix it inside the color page. Rec 709 is already good to go. So the process between these two is different, and if you want to learn one over the other, check the chapter markers linked below. You'll also notice though, I have two layers underneath it. Well, this is actually the thumbnail we made inside of Affinity. I have just the cutout of our person, as well as just our background, so we can compare and contrast the Affinity version to the Davinci version and see how close we can get. Before we start though, we need to do a little bit of prep work, starting first with project settings. Go to color management and you're looking for this tab right here. On color science, change this to Davinci YRGB, timeline color space, change to Davinci wide gamut intermediate, and output color space, you want Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. Warning, this setting is specific to Windows. If you're on a Mac, the appropriate setting would either be Rec 709 Scene or Rec 709A. I'm not exactly sure. You'll have to watch the Mac Davinci people to figure that out. Don't worry about this messing with your timeline and the colors of other clips. These settings are specific to stuff you do in the color page, so changing this isn't going to ruin anything. The next thing we need to do is to pick one frame to use for a thumbnail. After all, this is a video, and we don't want to render out all of this. So I'm going to look through this clip and find a frame that I prefer. Let's go with this right here. I'm going to zoom all the way in, make a cut, so it's only one frame long. Disable this layer and begin work. Go to the color page, and I know this looks really complicated, but trust me, it's not that bad. Get rid of effects so we have more space for our nodes. Make our preview to fit. Turn off gallery, LUTs, media pool, clips. We don't need any of that. This stuff down here is going to be helpful for our actual nodes. If you want kind of a refresher on my color correcting process, I'd recommend watching the last video, tip number 4 specifically. But don't worry, if you haven't seen that video, I'm going to be doing a lot of the same steps here. I just might not explain it as well. So to start, we're going to want 5 nodes. In order to create a new node, I'm going to hit Alt-S as a keyboard shortcut. Alternatively, you can click on a node, add one, and add a serial to go to the end, or before to add a serial before the previous one you've clicked on. Another helpful option is the node label, which helps us organize everything and gives us a better idea as to what we're adjusting. So I'm going to call this first node CSTN, call this second node exposure. The third one, I'm going to call balance or white balance. The fourth, saturation. And the fifth node, CST out. And I'm going to start first with these CSTs. What are CSTs? Those are color space transforms. I talked earlier how log is a color space, and in order to get it over to Rec 709, that's what these transforms are for. You can search it inside the library. I have them right here. And I want to add one to CST in and CST out. Start with in. For input color space is going to be dependent on how you shot this footage, what camera were you using specifically. For me, I was using a Sony FX30, so my log profile was S-Gamut 3 Cine and S-Log 3. For our output color space, you would think Rec 709, right? Actually, we're going to go to Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate, which is the biggest color space inside Davinci Resolve. This will make it to where we have room for all of our changes. And then on CST out, what we'll do is go from Davinci Wide Gamut to Rec 709. And now we can finally see our image. That's why we do these two nodes first, so that we can check the ones in the middle and make accurate adjustments based on that. I like to go into CST1 and turning off tone mapping. Okay, cool. So we don't need any effects, at least for a little bit. So I'm gonna close that down and we're gonna start with exposure. Go to your primary color wheels and change the pivot to 336. This is the number you should use if you're working inside of Davinci Wide Gamut, which we are. And here's something I forgot to mention in my previous video. This is actually where I do my contrast adjustments. Yeah, it's not just for exposure. So if we wanted to bump the contrast, we could slide things up or slide things down to lower the contrast. So yeah, some cool options there. We're gonna leave that at default for now. The main adjustment, our exposure, is in the HDR wheels, and it's this slider right here. Basically, you're adjusting the brightness value. Do you need to make your image brighter? Go right. If you need it darker, go to the left. My shot is actually pretty well exposed already, so I'm just gonna go to -7 and adjust it slightly and leave it there. If you wanna see what each node is doing in the chain, here's a little keyboard shortcut. Control D disables a node. So if we do that, here's with the exposure node off, and here's with it on. We didn't do much, right? Because we just lowered the exposure slightly. But this can give you an idea of your changes, which I think is nice. Let's go on to balance. And on the balance node, what I want you to do is go to gamma and change this to linear. What did that do? So basically, instead of having to adjust lift, gamma, gain, and offset, the only thing we have to worry about here is gain. Go down here and change the luminance mix to 0. Say that 5 times fast. And now we want to do our balance adjustments. You can see here, if you scroll in, that my skin is a little bit red. In fact, the entire image is red. Balance is designed to fix those color discrepancies and get it looking a little bit more neutral. Here's how you do that. Go to scopes and make sure vector scope is selected. Then go to these sliders, turn on show 2x zoom, skin tone indicator, and gradical, also colorize. Then go to these 3 dots and click display qualifier focus. What did all that just do? Okay, you see this little gray line here? That's our skin tone indicator. And you want your skin to fall onto that line. Well, how do we tell where our skin tone's at? That's what that qualifier focus did. If we click here, qualifier, and hover onto our skin, you see that it falls slightly to the right of the indicator. So what we want to do is on our gain wheel, move it over to the left. I also notice here in the middle, it's not sitting right. So we need to move that a little bit further down. So I'm going to take my gain wheel, move to the left, and move a little bit down, like so. And then if we turn our node off and on, we went from red, pink to a little bit more yellow, neutral. I wasn't really looking at my image to do that. I was looking primarily on my vector scope. So that's what I would do for balance. All right, moving on. Saturation. This node requires a little bit of setup. For starters, you want to go to color space, HSV, and then channels, remove channel 1 and channel 3. This makes it to where our saturation is primarily adjusted with gain and gamma. Gain controlling the brighter parts of saturation and gamma the mid and lows. What I see often is people cranking the gamma up and then moving the gain down like so. And that's one way to adjust saturation, a great way. However, I found another method that's a little bit more simple to me and still gives consistently great results. If you prefer this saturation node, do not change it. If you love it, keep it as a part of your workflow. What I'm going to show you is just simply another option, if that's okay. All right, so what I've done is I've reset my node grade and clicked reset on here so it's back to its default. And instead of using those sliders and changing the color space to HSV and turning the channels off, instead what you can do is go to this color slice tool. And right here, we have a saturation dial just as before, so we can make our image more saturated and less saturated, which is nice. But the benefit of the color slice tool is it lets us adjust the saturation of specific colors. So you see my shirt over here? I mean, yeah, it looks blue, but what if we want to make it more blue, more saturated? Well, you can go to this teardrop icon, move this slider up, and look at that. Okay, now that's blue. If we do Control D on and off, it just affects the blue parts of our image, not everything else, which I think is pretty nice. I'm going to go ahead and bring the red down to 0.80, move our yellow up to like 1.3, and then our blue I already like pretty well. But one thing you can do here, you see this hue slider? What this does is it allows us to change the color of the color we're adjusting. I know that sounds a little confusing, right? But what if you wanted your blue to be more cyan, for instance? You can click and drag, and we're adjusting just the blue of our shirt, changing the color of it slightly. We could make our blue green if we wanted, or even red. But for me, I'm going to keep it kind of in this cyan area because I like the way that looks. You can just fiddle around with and adjust these settings as you like it. All right, so I think this is at a point where I consider this a pretty good grade. Really, all we've done here is basic color correction. If you wanted to add a crazy look on top of this, you're free to, because we've made the image essentially as neutral as possible, getting it to look how it did in the camera. These are basic adjustments you should always do. And then from there, if you wanted to add a look or anything crazy, you can go in between the saturation and CST out node and add like a teal and orange look, a LUT, whatever you want. If you want to save this to use for future color correction projects, that's easy. Go to Gallery, and then you have two options. Stills are grades that are only available in this project, whereas power grades, similar to power bins, show up in every project, which is what I want. So I'm gonna right click, grab still, and then if I change the label and call this tutorial, bam, now this will be available in every single project we do. But you may have noticed something. I only really covered color correcting for a video. Remember, we're supposed to be making a thumbnail here. Well, in order to do that, we're gonna have to exaggerate our changes. Typically, for color correcting a video, I encourage people to stay fairly subtle with their adjustments. Slight tweaks to exposure, balance, and saturation can go a long way to create a visually cohesive image that doesn't strain the eyes. But for a thumbnail, keep in mind, it's gonna be really tiny on YouTube. We need to over-exaggerate, add a bunch of crazy detail, just so that you're able to pick it out from a sea of 1,000 different thumbnails. So while the nodes are staying the same, our process with them is going to be slightly different. Here's an example of that. If we go to exposure, you know how we didn't really mess with the contrast earlier? Our image looks fine, right? Well, for thumbnail land, we're cranking things up a notch. We're going to 1.25, baby. But bam. In exposure, we don't want to go dark. We want our image to be seen from the stars. So I'm going to bump it up to like 0.80. And wow, our background looks super blown out. But remember, we don't care about the background. The only thing we care about is our person, our cutout. And so long as this looks okay, the rest of it can look as bad as it needs to, basically. On balance, I'm going to make very minor tweaks, just stuff that I know personally works well. I'm going to change this to 1 and then move this down to 0.93, like so. And then saturation is already pretty much perfect, so I'm going to leave that alone. And from there, we've gotten a little bit closer to that thumbnail magic, but I'm going to offer up a couple of more nodes to help things look even better. We're going to start by going to saturation and hitting Alt-S a couple of times. I'm going to start on node number 5. For this one, I'm going to go to node label and call this hue versus loom. Now this node is not going to be necessary for everybody, but the use case is important, so I want to just let everybody know. Click on this graph, and what you want, instead of this custom curve, you want hue versus luminance. That's kind of confusing, right? What exactly is this doing? Well, these are our hues, and we're adjusting the luminance or the brightness of certain hues. How is this important? So our blue shirt, right? It's saturated for sure, But if I go to the qualifier and click on it, you can see it kind of lives in this point of fairly normal luminance. Well, if I extend out these points to give us a nice range, and then click on our middle and drag up the gain, we can make our blue shirt brighter or darker, or really anything blue in the image. You might not need this for your image, but if you're noticing certain colors need to be brighter, not necessarily the whole image, hue versus luminance is a great place to do it. Next up, we're going to go to node number 6, and I'm going to call this one Sharpen. This one's pretty simple. Click on this little icon right here of like a teardrop and a triangle. Change this to Sharpening, and all we're going to mess with is the radius. And I recommend you zoom in a little bit on your person when you're adjusting this. Bringing it up will blur the image, whereas bringing it down will sharpen. And if you go all the way down, you get that sort of deep fried, almost Mr. Beast look. This might be okay for a thumbnail for you, but I'm gonna tone it down just a little bit. I find you need to do a little bit more work on the log images as opposed to the Rec 709 ones, because Rec 709 typically, when you're filming, has a little bit of sharpness built in, whereas the log ones might not. So I'm gonna go with 0.44. Just so we get a little bit more detail. We're a little bit sharper, but not overly deep fried. One thing I'm noticing though, is I'm not liking what that did to my shirt. You know, it's adding a bunch of extra noise in here that I don't really like. Well, we could also add some noise reduction. And I typically like to do this before the first CST. That way we're just starting with our base image and it's not having to take into account the saturation, the exposure, all that crazy stuff. So we're gonna add serial before to bring it first in the chain. Go here to motion effects. And then the only one I like to use is spatial in R. For mode, I'd recommend better or enhanced. AI ultra noise reduction is for the studio version. Faster doesn't look really good, and better and enhanced can typically give you good results. I'm gonna go better and have your radius either on medium or small. Just kind of try the two and see what you like. And then with these two linked, kind of move it up. Let's zoom in on our shirt a little bit until we get rid of that sort of noisy pattern. I'm gonna go right here, but one problem, you'll notice it also affected our skin and our face, and we don't want that. We only want it affecting the shirt. How do we do that? Well, there are ways to mask things out in the color page. See, we're using almost every tool here. Let's go over here to Windows, and the one I like to use is Curve. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna draw a curve just around our shirt. Not trying to be perfect here because you can adjust it later after the fact. And keep in mind, you can click outside the image as well. And now with that curve complete, you can see the noise reduction affected the shirt, but it didn't affect the person. If we wanted to invert it, you can hit this button. So now our face is super noise reduced, but our shirt's back to looking noisy. Typically for softness, I like this at around 6, 7. And then the inside, we can crank this up a little bit to kind of hide the transition from the start of the mask to the normal image. So we're gonna go something like that. Noise reduction, trying to stay organized our entire step. And don't worry, we only have to do this once. And then once we do, we can save it and reuse it for later. So labeling things now, I think is gonna be way more important for later on. The next major thing we have to do is to cut out our subject from the background. After all, we've already made some nice text and a beautiful image for it to sit on. So how do we cut it out? Well, the best tool for the job is, of course, Magic Mask. And I like to add the node after the CST, because from this point on, we're not going to be really affecting the image in terms of color. Rather, we're going to be making a mask, and those tools that we're going to add will affect just the mask. So I'm going to make 2 more nodes to kind of round us out. And on node number 9, call this Magic Mask. Go to this button right here. Keep in mind, this is a studio only feature. And I'm gonna drop just a few points. Remember, the less the better. If you add 15,000 points, it's gonna take a longer time to render. So I'm gonna do one on my face, one on my shirt, one on my hair. And how do we know if we did a good job? Well, you can go to this mask overlay, and anything in red is our mask. To actually see it cut out from the background, we have to add an alpha output. Basically a little checkerboard pattern so the color page can actually see that transparent data. Right click, add alpha output, which brings up this blue node right here. And we need to connect the blue line all the way from Magic Mask directly to this alpha output. So if we go here, then here, then here, and turn off our overlay, there we are. We're selected from the background. But the edges kind of look a little nasty and not very well cut out. Surely Affinity or Photoshop could do a better job. Well, thankfully, there's a couple of settings we can tweak. Go to Better, and that already helps, right? But then what I find really helps the edges is going to Clean Black and going 15. Ooh, isn't that so much nicer? From here, we can go back to the edit page and do the appropriate resizing. Because remember, our original thumbnail had a big guy up in the corner. So now would be the time to go ahead and do that to our original image. I'm gonna go 1.8, and then I'm gonna go 440 on the X and 47 or so on the Y. And to compare, I can throw my other guy on here, move it over just a little bit more, and call it good. But uh-oh, our magic mask disappeared. What do we do? What do we do? It's really simple. We already have our tracking points and stuff. Just click this retract button. It's done. And the cool thing about this is because we only have our clip being a second long, it doesn't have to render an entire 10-minute clip, only the one frame we have selected, so it works super fast. Now we have 2 more nodes to go, and these are effects. The first one is going to be drop shadow, and the second is going to be glow, like this. And then I'm going to label this, call this color glow, and call this one drop shadow. And immediately our background is gone. That's a glow specific setting. Just go to effects and turn on is used for compositing. And there we go. But we'll come back to glow. It's not its turn yet. We're starting first with drop shadow. For this, I like to have it be a normal white color rather than black. And then for the shadow strength, let's go 700. Drop angle 80, which puts us right in the center. Drop distance is 0. And then we'll leave the blur as default. And it looks a little weird right now. That's because we have our background image still on. So if we turn that off, is there a reason I'm doing this? Oh, I have the glow on. Okay, turn the glow off. Yeah, this is what we're looking for right here. Basically, there's no real angle. It's just right behind our person. And with the drop distance being at 0, we create a nice little white shadow sort of along our figure, which helps blend it into the image properly. I would always keep these settings on. Don't bother changing these. Color glow, however, I would change. So now I'm going to turn it back on, and we can fix this weird thing going on. For starters, let's bring this spread down to 400. And then for color filter, I'd recommend picking the color of your background. I'm going to hit OK. Kind of play around with these settings till we get something looking good. Yeah, there we go. So basically what it's done is we've created a nice little purple glow around the front of our head, the back of our neck, right around my nose as well, which again, just kind of helps it blend into the background a little bit better. Once you have these settings dialed in, the only thing you would need to change is your color based specifically on the background you're working on. But yeah, we're pretty much done. What we can do now is compare it to our Affinity version. I'm gonna take our Affinity Aiden and move him over slightly. Here's our Affinity version on the left, and here's our Davinci version on the right. Pretty similar color in the shirts. We get a little bit more detail inside of Davinci. We still have color inside of our hair. And we're even a little bit brighter, which I think helps us stand out a little bit more from the background, but obviously we could adjust that to taste if we want to. And because it's just a simple node tree like this, we don't have to mess with mask or weird groups or setting this up every single time. Once we have this done, literally all we have to do, let's clean up our node graph first, turn off our background, go back to gallery, power grades, right click, grab still. And then from here, we have a power grade that we can use on literally every log clip. In fact, I've already done that. Right click, and there we go. The main thing you'll have to adjust is obviously the glow, depending on your background, and the magic mask. Now the question is, can we do this exact same process for a Rec 709 clip? I mean, yeah, you can. That's why I'm making the tutorial. Again, we're going to pick out one frame. So I'm zooming all the way in and picking one that I think would look good for a thumbnail. And I'm going to reuse the same background and Aiden to compare it to. And what I'm going to do is literally use the grade we just made, apply it, and then adjust things to fit more appropriately for Rec 709. If you don't understand what all these nodes mean, go back and watch the log section. But if you just want to watch me make adjustments, then that's what we're doing here. The first thing you got to change is your CSTs. Remember, we're no longer using our log. We're just using regular Rec 709. So that's what we're going to change it to. Rec 709, Gamma 2.4. Keep in mind this is Windows specific. Make sure tone mapping is set to none. Then on our CST out, we go from Davinci Wide Gamut back to Rec 709. So we go from our small color space to our big one, we make our changes, and then go right back to Rec 709. Only on this one, you want to make sure the tone mapping is off on the output as well. All right. So I know for a fact that we're not going to need noise reduction on this one, because if I disable all of these nodes, my image doesn't look very noisy, or there's no sections that I think I'm going to need to adjust. So I'm going to just go ahead and get rid of it. However, if you're looking for those settings, again, mode, better or enhance, radius, go small or medium, just pick whatever looks good, and mess with this slider until the noise you're looking for is gone. But for me, I don't need it. So there goes. Bye-bye. And now we can adjust the rest of these nodes one by one. So let's start first with exposure. I'm going to turn this node on. And already it looks kind of wonky, but that's fine. Let's go back to HDR, turn our exposure back to 0, and turn our contrast back to 1 so we can make proper adjustments. For the exposure, it already looks fairly bright enough. I'm going to crank it up ever so slightly to like +10, but play around with it, see what looks good for you. The main thing we'll need to adjust is that contrast. And while 1.250 looked a little much, 1.2 actually doesn't look too bad. So we're going to keep it there. Again, make sure your pivot is on 3.36. We're still working in Davinci Wide Gamut, so this number does not change. Off to balance. Turn that node on. Again, for this one, keep in mind gamma needs to be set to linear. And then all we got to do is operate the gain wheel to get our colors a little bit more in balance. And thankfully, this clip had a similar issue to the previous one, where if we turn it off, notice their skin is kind of pink and red. So if we apply the same adjustment we did earlier, moving a little bit to the left, we bring back some of that yellow. And remember, in order to see that, we go to Vector Scope, turn these 4 options on, display qualifier focus, then go to qualifier, hover over your skin, and make sure it's falling on that skin indicator line. And you can see it is. In fact, we have a black subject here, and we can actually move it slightly more. And there we go. So that's a little bit more in the center. We got the skin tones right where we need to be. Again, look primarily at the vector scope, not necessarily the image. Make sure luminance mix is set to 0. Okay, you could use our standard saturation node where you have it on HSV and removes channel 1 and 3. However, I'm going to go the simpler option and simply use the color slice tool. So let's go over here. Reset literally everything, and now we can mess with the saturation of specific colors. Thankfully, he has a blue shirt on, similar to the last example, so I'm going to bump up the blue a lot. He also has a little bit of red that I'm trying to get rid of, just based on our balance, so we're going to go 0.80, and then I'm actually going to bump up the yellow slightly. Why? Look at his hair. Here it is with 0 in the yellow. If we bump it up to the top, we get to see a lot more of his hair. And then we're going to move our blue again kind of back into that cyan, but we can change it to literally any color we want. And then finally, I'm going to adjust the overall saturation from 1 to 1.2. If we were just color correcting a video, again, I probably wouldn't do this, but for a thumbnail, more saturated, more brighter, more betterer. That's English, right? Back on to hue versus luminance. Not everything needs this. Yours might. Again, I'm doing a similar thing here. Where are there any shades here that we want to make brighter? We can go to his shirt, extend out these points just to give it a little bit more room. Then click on luminance gain. Well, actually, Click on the center point, then click on luminance gain to make it brighter or darker. So here it is with it off, and here it is with it on. We could probably go like a little bit lower here. Now, remember how I said earlier that Rec 709 images typically don't need as much sharpening? Here's a good example of that. If we turn this on, you see what it does to the glasses? It adds like almost a weird white outline around it, and the hair especially looks bad in my opinion. This is over sharpening. So instead, I'm going to bump it up to like 4.7 to where we still get a little bit of sharpening. Remember, 50 is neutral. Anything higher blurs and anything lower sharpens. So we're still adding a little bit of sharpening. We're just not going crazy bananas bonkers with it. All right, and now we're ready for the cutout step of the process. So go over to our magic mask, this button right here. Remember, studio feature. I'm going to reset it. And if we get this option, we can just disconnect the alpha and reconnect it later. I'm gonna click on his shirt, his face, his hair, and his microphone. Toggle the mask overlay. I mean, that looks all right, but it can look a little better. Click on better and clean black at 15. If your edges don't look right, mess with clean black first. That's a setting I primarily recommend. But that should be fine for me. We're gonna toggle the mask overlay off and then connect the alpha output. And if you didn't watch our log section, basically, you want to right click, add alpha output, which is this blue dot right here, and connect all the blue boxes from magic mask over to drop shadow to color grade to here, so that we can actually get a transparent background, which then we could apply over top things. The reason these two nodes are connected to this little alpha part is that these nodes are working on the cutout of our image, not necessarily the entire thing behind it. So they need that alpha data. For drop shadow, we're gonna keep things exactly the same. If you wanna copy the settings, here they are. And our color glow is also going to be mostly the same. The thing you wanna do here is just make sure your color filter is the background color or something similar to it. And we just want like a little bit of a purple outline. I also noticed our mask made a mistake here where it cut out a bit of our shoulder. To fix that, go back to your mask, add another point, and you press this retract. And if you needed to, you can zoom, move our guy around, and to get the background back, again, just click this retract button. But yeah, I think that's basically it for Rec 709. The process is almost identical. The only thing you're really doing between the two is changing the CST, the first one specifically. You start at Rec 709 Gamma 2.4, you go to Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate, and then on our out, you keep this the same, but make sure tone mapping on both is set to none. If we want to turn off our entire grade, we can click this button. This is what our shot looked like before, and this is what it looks like after. And if we compare it to Affinity Aiden, yeah, I'd say these are pretty similar. The blues look about the same. The sharpness is still really good. We get a little bit of brightness in some of the red tones. Our hair sticks out appropriately enough. We don't look over sharpened. I think that's a pretty good job. And then if we want to save this, because again, you might be working on Rec 709 thumbnails, go to Gallery, Power Grade, right click, grab Still. And then for this, I would go Change Label, Rec 709. And on our first one, change label log. And now you have the perfect template to create epic thumbnails inside of DaVinci Resolve. Oh man, I almost forgot. We have to actually, export our thumbnail to use on YouTube. Thankfully, that process is pretty easy. Go over to the deliver page, and the format you want is PNG. JPEG is also good if you need to save on file size, but it will come at the cost of quality, so go PNG first. On codec, I like to have it at RGB 16 bits. For resolution, I would put on custom and make sure it's 1920 by 1080. Even if you're working in a 4K timeline or some weird aspect ratio, YouTube expects a 1920 by 1080 thumbnail, so that's what we're setting the resolution to. Frame rate doesn't matter, it's literally just an image. And this right here is a pretty cool option, Export Alpha. Let's say you're in the situation where you like retouching people inside of Resolve, but you still want to do the text, background work, and vignetting inside of Photoshop or Affinity. Well, that's what this option's for. Go back to the edit page, disable your background, and you'll notice we have this checkerboard alpha pattern right here. If we click export alpha, this cutout will be available to use inside of any program with that transparent background. So what I like to do is we'll render out one called cutout. And before we do, make sure you set an in and out range. Basically, go to the start of your thumbnail and hit I and O to create just a range so we're not rendering 1,000 images. Go to add render queue, hit render. Then what I like to do is go back, add your background, and we'll call this finished thumbnail. And for here, we don't really need the alpha because we have a background. Go back to add render queue, make sure your in and out range is right, and then hit render. And now we have both available to use for YouTube or touching up in other software. With that being said, that's the end of this tutorial. Thank you guys so much for watching. And if you have any comments or concerns about my color grading process, let me know. I love learning more about this page. I just think it has so many cool tools inside of it. Anyway, I've been Aiden, and I'll see you guys next time.